Where'd you go to school, Mike?
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Hometown Heroes. I'm Mike Kenichi, and I am very excited tonight. I've been a longtime fan of this gentleman, probably since around 1987, and he's had a wonderful career in the world of baseball and the world of sports. He was the first face you ever saw on ESPN, so it is my honor to introduce to you and welcome Mr. George Grande. And George, I want to thank you for coming on today.
Great to be with you, Mike. Great to be with everybody back in the Valley. A lot of good memories, a lot of fun times.
Oh, yeah, definitely. So, George, let me ask you, I think the first thing I want to ask you is how did the love for baseball begin for you? Because, we know you had a very good college career, but how did the love for baseball begin?
Oh, ever since I was just a young kid, my dad loved the game. My brother loved the game. We spent a lot of time talking baseball, playing baseball in the backyard. And, I can still remember, I close my eyes and I think of way back, I was born in 1946. So, some of the moments that I remember watching on TV with my dad, the Willie Mays catch, we ran home from school and off Vic Wirtz and the coming in, sitting in the living room, watching that and playing in the backyard. And the game was always something very special for me. It's a game that, I love sports, period.
Right.
And anybody that gravitates to sports, you like the athletic part of it, but baseball is something very special. The intellect of it, the integrity of the game itself, not just the athletic part of it, but the fact that it takes preparation, it takes a mental acuity that some other sports don't have. The fact that there's no clock, that you could. When I was at USC, we were down trailing a game 8-0, and we scored 9 runs in the 9th inning to win a game. So I'll never forget that. So you couldn't do that in any other sport, but it's something that everybody is attracted to, something in their youth. And for me, baseball and sports was always at the top of my list.
Right. Now, let me ask you, did you have a certain team you rooted for as a kid? I know the Brooklyn Dodgers and New York Giants were still around. And, of course, you had the Yankees, the Red Sox. Was there a team that you gravitated towards when you were a kid?
I was a Willie Mays fan. And I always wore 24. I still think he was the greatest player I ever saw play the game. And for me, just to watch him, the way he played the game, the joy that he played the game with, and later on to get to know him when the 30 years I did the Hall of Fame ceremonies at Cooperstown, and the times I spent in San Francisco, and even most recently being out there and spending some time with him. So I was a Willie Mays fan first, a Giant fan second. But, I love, Mantle. You love Duke Snider, that era of those great center fielders in New York during the 50s. It was something very special. But for me, Willie was a guy. And I still, 24 is still a special number for me.
Right. And George, let me ask you, you played a lot of baseball as a kid, I would imagine, Little League, stuff like that. You went to high school, I believe, to a school called the Gunnery in Washington, Connecticut. Just talk about that school a little bit. And it was a private school, but were you able to play for the high school team then?
Oh, yeah. We my mom and dad were both school teachers. And I was a decent student, but we all get into trouble in high school and in junior high. And my dad was a friend of Augie Miller. They went to Yale together, and Augie was the headmaster at Gunnery, and they wanted me to take a step away and kind of break me up from some of my friends that we all hung around together. So I ended up going to Gunnery and had a wonderful experience there. I had great friends. In fact, we were just emailing each other yesterday. a bunch of us that still have stayed very close. And for me, it was a great experience. Back then, today it's more difficult. You played three sports. You played football, basketball, baseball.
Right.
I think it's really an injustice for kids today because you might be, say you're good at baseball. Maybe you're average at basketball and you're poor at football. So you learned how to sit the bench. You learned how to not be the star of a team.
Right.
In this day and age, unfortunately, we're left with kids that are good football players. They go to football camps, or if you're a basketball player, you go to basketball camps. Same thing for baseball. And you're the star all the time. And I think you lose something about learning about yourself when you're not the star all the time. And I think that's something that we all had to experience back then. And I think we all enjoyed it. And it kept you, in shape all year long, which was great. But for me, staying in Connecticut was big, and having the opportunity to play three sports there at Gunnery was a great experience.
Right. And George, let me ask you, you brought up a good point about, concentrating on one sport too much. Do you think that's a big reason why a lot of these young kids are, having arm problems, pitchers and stuff, because they're playing too much baseball throughout the year? Do you think that hurts them in the long run?
Mike, you hit the nail on the head. I've got a lot of good friends that are on the medical side of sports. And they tell me that, especially when you're, 8, 9, 10 in that vicinity, to throw a baseball all the time, 8, 9 months out of the year is not good for you. To learn how to throw a curveball that early is not good for you. Just like, lifting weights, if you're a football player, you put yourself in a position where you accentuate one part of your athletic ability. I even think even today, when you see so many, we see so many abdominal injuries by hitters because they spend so much time trying to hit. And if you're a right-hand hitter, you pull the left side of your body. If you're a left-hand hitter, you pull the right side of your body. I mean, when I grew up, and many of us, you never had pulled side muscles or abdominal muscles because you're playing sports all year long. You were taxing your body in different ways, not just doing the same thing all the time. I remember when I was with the Yankees, in fact, I had this discussion with Joey Votto. Don Mattingly was one of the hardest workers I was ever around.
Right.
We became very close, but he was tireless in the way he took batting practice. He'd take early BP, at 12:30. Then he'd come out for early BP before the game. And it was that left-handed swing. That's all he did, time and time again. And it led to back problems for him. And I fully believe that had he not worked so hard and been so diligent at what he did, that he would have played longer and he'd be a Hall of Famer today. In my mind, he's a Hall of Famer anyways, but he's probably not going to make it into the Hall of Fame, at least by the writer's vote, certainly. But, the way things go now, it's somewhere up the road. I still hope he gets in. But, I think that the essence of what we're talking about is balance your body. Balance your legs, your hips, your shoulders, your arms. Do different things, and it gives you the opportunity to balance your athletic ability. And I think you're going to reduce some of your injuries. Our team doctor, Dr. Timothy Kremchek, who's a brilliant doctor, and he's one of the, other than Jim Andrews, he's probably the number one Tommy John surgery baseball guy in America today. We had a conversation about a year or two ago, and he said, "You're not going to believe this, but I have parents coming to me with their son who is not injured in high school saying, Tim, would you do Tommy John surgery on my son because I want him to throw harder?"
Oh, my God.
And, they don't understand what it is to go through Tommy John surgery and the year and a half or 2 years of rehab that you have to go through to get back where you were. And there's no guarantees you're going to get back where you were. So your body, I think you owe it to your body to balance it athletically, do different things at different times. And I think playing three sports gives you the ability to do that. And if you're just throwing, if you're a pitcher and you're throwing in, I think we're seeing it today. everybody's taught, get to the major leagues, throw 100. You know,
Yeah.
you don't get signed unless you can throw 100. But the other side of that is we're gonna have this year. We'll have for the first time in history a number of factors that will tell you, number one, pitchers don't go as far. This is the first time in history where there won't be as many 4-day rest as opposed to 5-day rest starts in baseball, which is a shame. And you're not going to see a lot of kids get the opportunity to start when they're in their 20s, to be in the bullpen, then maybe move to the starting rotation, because they're taught throw as hard as you can, as long as you can, and then you're out of there. They're never going to learn how to pitch. Warren Spahn always told me that, hitting is timing and pitching is disrupting timing. Meaning that's what you have to do. It's not how hard you throw. And everybody says, what's most important? Is it velocity? Today everybody thinks velocity is the most important. Is it movement? Is it location? Spahn always said, number one is location, number two is movement, and number three is velocity. That's not the most important thing if you know how to pitch. The guy behind me over here, Tom Seaver, my teammate at USC, he was about 5'10", 5'11" his sophomore year at USC. All of a sudden, he grew about 4.5 inches. Yeah. So, and he was throwing about 88, 87. Now, all of a sudden, he's throwing 94, 95 his junior year. So he learned how to pitch before he became a fastball pitcher. If you can do that, you're going to be a lot better off than just throw hard, throw hard, throw hard.
Right. And, that leads me to segue into my next topic. You went to USC, and let me ask you, did you go on a scholarship, or did you just go to USC and then you tried out for the baseball team? How did the baseball team come about at USC?
Well, I had I played in a number of teams, a number of summer league teams, and one of my coaches knew Rizzoto, the legendary coach at SC. Right. And they never recruited outside of California. Very seldom. In fact, when I was there, the only player outside of California that got a scholarship off the top was, you remember Dave Kingman?
Yes.
He was from Chicago. He was a pitcher.
He was a character.
Yeah. He was a pitcher. He wasn't a hitter. He was a pitcher. That's the only guy on our team that was outside of the state of California. So Coach Dato said, come to SC, and if you make the team, I'll put you on a work program. We'll get you scholarship money. And he was true to his name. I did that. I went there, made the freshman team, and played freshman football and baseball. And then played 4 years of baseball at SC and had a wonderful experience. It was, for me, a great baseball experience, because I found out that, hey, we're all pretty good in high school. And then you get there, and I played with 14 future major leaguers. Wow. So you begin to realize that, hey, I was pretty good in high school, but, and I realized I better start to think about something else. And Rod Dato, as a matter of fact, introduced me to Vin Scully. While we were playing, we used to play an exhibition game with the Dodgers, and we were at Dodger Stadium, and he whistled for me to come in from shortstop, and he said, Vinny, this young man is interested in broadcasting. And Vin said, well, give me a call. And I did. And I was a gopher for Vin for 4 years. I clean the booth, rip the wires, get him coffee. So I learned that, I was a decent ball player, but I was going to spend my career in the minor leagues. So the end result, turn the page, move on. And for me, broadcasting became something special, and I could stay close to baseball.
Right. And, though, one of the best moments of your career, as a baseball player, though, is you were on the 1968 Trojan team that won the College World Series. I don't care how long ago it was, you never forget it. It's just got to be a great feeling. Just talk about that experience, being on a College World Series championship team.
It was my whole experience at SC was wonderful, because it taught me so many things. First of all, I left Connecticut, and I remember sitting in my room when I first got there saying, oh my God, I'm 3,000 miles away. What the heck did I do? You learn how to be on your own. I made great friends. And those friends are still close. Tom House was my roommate. Tommy and I just talked the other day. He's the guy that was, he's the guru, the pitching guru, and he mentors Tom Brady and a bunch of other quarterbacks. But we reminisce so often. And Rod has passed away, but his son Justin and I remain very close. We talk all the time. And Rod used to, when I left SC, and you remember different things. I remember, in fact, talking about Tom Seaver. You remember that Seaver signed with the Braves while we were still playing, and Commissioner Eckert negated the signing because we had already played a game. We thought it was just a scrimmage. It was an exhibition game. So they put his name in a hat. But during that interim month period before he re-signed with the Mets, he pitched a couple of inter-squad games. And bottom line was, I always kidded him that the first time I faced him, he struck me out on 3 pitches. Second time, I got a single. So I had a 500 career record against Tom Seaver. But I can still remember to this day, and I close my eyes, I remember standing in the batter's box at Bovard Field, or now it's Dado Field. And Rod, our coach, was right behind us during this inter-squad scrimmage. And I remember him cheering me on. I remember him saying, he used to call me Rio El Rancho Grande. He said, Rio, come on, you can get this meatball. Yeah. This is Tom Seaver. He's calling a meatball, right? So he knew I didn't have much of a chance. But I remember that, and that's what he did for so many of us. He instilled confidence. He instilled the ability to get everything you had out of yourself. So it was a great experience being part of USC baseball, and to be part of that 68 team. Many of us get together on a regular basis and just talk baseball and talk those memories. Danny Bain, Rod made us, our sophomore year, we were on the Spartans, which was the USC junior varsity. Yeah. And we were the co-captains. And that meant we go play JV games and we ran the team. There was nobody else to go with you. But, Danny, became a great businessman. Trader Joe's, he's the president of Trader Joe's. Oh, okay. So many guys like that. I mean, you talk about the McGuires and the Seavers and the great baseball players, but we had so many guys who became so successful in business. And we've stayed pretty close. So it was a great experience and a lot of good people. And being in Omaha was one of the most enjoyable times of my life, because you were back then you were there for about 10 days to 2 weeks if you won, and if the rain prolonged the World Series. But you got to know the players on the other teams, you got to know the coaches, and many of those people have remained friends over the years. Right.
And you started your broadcasting career, George, and I think one guy that really was instrumental in the development of your career was a guy by the name of Steve Kaminis. I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right, but he helped you in New Haven, I believe, Connecticut.
Steve Kaminis.
Kaminis, right.
Steve and I were, he was our news guy, and I was the sports guy at WERI in Westerly, Rhode Island. Right. And Steve and I remained close friends for so many years. In fact, we back in those days, you did radio, and you worked about 12, 14-hour days, and we did. And then he became a news director. Twice he was in Providence and tried to get me to come to Providence. That was one of those times, was when I came to New Haven to work at Channel 8, and I didn't go. The other time, when he tried to get me to go with him to Providence, I ended up taking the job at ESPN. But we were friends forever. He was one of the most outstanding newsmen that I was ever around, and just a wonderful person, a great person.
Right. And you talk about radio. Didn't you do some of the Red Sox pregame and postgame shows back then, as like that kind of started your career a little bit? Just talk about that a little bit. Did you know, I think it was Joe Castiglione. I mean, were you able to meet him?
Oh, yeah. Oh, Joey and I grew up together. His dad was our doctor, and his mom and dad and my mom and dad were close friends. And Joey and I talked every couple of weeks. And there's another story where I tried to get him to come to ESPN during the late 70s, early 80s. And he tried to get me twice to go to Boston, but it just never it never meshed. But Joey and I are very proud of the fact we're both from Hamden, Connecticut. Very proud of the fact that, and ironically, Joey grew up. His family were staunch Yankee fans, and he ends up being the Red Sox broadcaster. But
sometimes it works out that way. Yeah.
Yeah, he's just he's a wonderful professional, a great person, and someone who will always be a close friend. Close friend.
Right. And, George, you will always be part of a trivia question and a history question as far as ESPN goes, because yourself and Lee Leonard, I believe, were the first two faces on ESPN, and you were the first anchor of SportsCenter. I think it was 1979, and the station was just starting out. It didn't do too well in the beginning, but just talk about, being at ESPN, because I think you were there probably a good 9 or 10 years, correct?
Yeah, we, I was, I mean, obviously started here in Connecticut at WNHC Radio and then WTNH.
Right.
As a matter of fact, when you talk about where we started, I love the work that I do with Major League Baseball. I love the places I've been, but some of the most enjoyable times I ever had was just doing high school sports here in Connecticut.
Right.
And especially in the Valley. I think I must have done probably over 30 banquets for Pop Shortell or Lou DiFilippo or Joe Bonanto or Buddy Amendola or Billy McAllister. Eddie Cotter would call up and say, "Go with you. We need you to MC this banquet." And Pop would call up and say, "Hey, big fellow, we need you to come in and we got a banquet coming up here. You got to do this, right?"
Yeah.
And how many Derby Shelton and Thanksgiving games I did. Great moments and great memories. Guys like John Pagliaro and people like that you watch grow up. Scotty Burrell at Hamden, Rich Diana, who has become a tremendous medical professional. People like that you watch grow up. So I loved every moment of the time here in Connecticut doing high school sport. And talk about broadcasting. Ali Vestro, who was in Waterbury, and Brad Harris was in Ansonia. We were all great friends, and we worked hard. We helped each other out, had a lot of fun, a lot of enjoyment. But little by little, I ended up going from Channel 8 to CBS in New York. And when I was at CBS, the two people that ran NBC Sports, Chet Simmons and Scotty Connell, watched the work that I did doing the pregame shows to the Giants football. And when they started ESPN, and they were supposed to get Jim Simpson to do the first show. He was going to leave NBC, but NBC wouldn't let him out of his contract. So Scotty called me and said, "Would you come up and do the first show?" And I was at CBS at the time, so I went into my bosses at CBS, said, would you let me do this show? I want to go up to Connecticut to ESPN to what? Where you want to go? And I said, go ahead.
Yeah.
So I went up, did the first show, and after the first show, Lee and I had great times and great relationships. Then Scotty said to me, would you think of coming here full time? And I said, I got to go home and talk to my wife, Joanne. We talked about it, and we debated about 30 seconds and decided to go for it. So I went back to the CBS people and I said, I'd like to get out of my contract to go to ESPN. And they laughed and said, look, we'll let you out, but when this thing falls flat in its face, come back, we'll have a job for you.
Right.
And that started 10 great years at ESPN. We had a lot of fun, a lot of enjoyment, a lot of great people. And again, I was just up there last week. I'm still on the board of directors of USA Baseball, and we awarded our Golden Spikes Award up at ESPN last week, and it was great to see some of my friends, some of the people that are still there. Not many of them left, but some are still there.
Right, and they've evolved so much over the years. It started with Baseball Tonight when they got the baseball deal back in 1990. And then, they've done so many things. Sunday Night Football. Now they're Monday Night Football as well. They have done so many things over the years and had so many, guys that have gone on to be legendary hosts. Look at where Dan Patrick's went since, ESPN. Chris Berman. I mean, of course, the late Tom Mees, who was excellent with hockey.
Yeah.
You know, so many guys that just Keith Oberman. I mean, Rich Eisen. I mean, it is crazy to think how ESPN started their careers, and these guys really, you know, went on to do so many great things over the years.
Yeah, we were when we started in '79. You know, heck, we didn't know whether we were going to last 3 weeks, 3 months, or 3 years.
Yeah.
You know, and Chet Simmons told us that, look, you know, someday hopefully we'll have, you know, the same games and contracts that ABC, NBC, and CBS has, but when we do get to that point, we'll have something that they don't have, and that's SportsCenter. And
right.
they really put an emphasis on what we did at SportsCenter, which was part of the joy of what we had. And when I ran SportsCenter as the senior announcer, what I tried to do was give each one of us the opportunity to work on the sport that we love. You know, for Tom Mees, it was hockey. For Bob Lee, it was college basketball and soccer. For Lou Palmer, who was a great professional, it was golf. For Chris Berman, it was football. So we all did SportsCenter, but then we all had the opportunity to do the sport that we really loved. And that was the joy of it. We all did the 6 o'clock and the 11 o'clock and the 2:30 a.m. SportsCenter and the updates and everything. But then we get to go out and cover the games that we loved. And certainly, you know, every time, you know, Chris and Bob and I get together a couple of times a year, and we start telling stories, and it's a joy because it was a labor of love. We all had a lot of fun, and not just professionally, but personally, we loved every minute of it.
Right. And, you know, 1989 comes, George, and, you know, you go from ESPN, and I mean, you talk about your first real baseball play-by-play job. You can't get any better than, you know, calling play-by-play with the New York Yankees with your former teammate Tom Seaver, and of course the legendary Phil Rizzuto. And you know, Bill White had become the president of the National League, so they had to replace him. And you and Seaver came in. And talk about a year in your first year, George. It was a crazy year. It started with Al Leiter getting traded for Jesse Barfield. Then, of course, Ricky Henderson gets traded for Luis Polonia, Eric Plunk, I think. Dallas Green gets fired midway into the season. It was just the craziest year for that team in 1989, and it wasn't a good team. But there was a lot of stuff going on that year for you in your first year broadcasting the Yankees. Just talk about that a little bit.
Well, you're not kidding. And all those things that happened for everybody to see, even behind the scenes, there were even more interesting stories. In fact, Al Leiter's son was one of our finalists for the Golden Spikes Award this year as a pitcher at Vanderbilt. And I was telling the story before Al got traded in April. And Al and I talk about it every time we see each other. Dallas had him throw over 160 pitches on a cold April night. And we still laugh about that. And what Dallas was trying to do is trying to make them tough. Dallas, you know, that's the way Dallas was. And it turned out he ended up getting hurt. But he bounced back and became a great professional. And we've been great friends for so many years. Dallas, you know, was Dallas and George had a love-hate relationship. Dallas was smart, though. Every manager that George had, the contract they signed was a personal services contract. So when they got fired, they still had to do what George told them to do to get their money. Dallas was the only manager that George had that signed a contract to manage the team. So in other words, when he got fired, he was still going to get his money and he could go home. And I'll never forget, we were in Detroit, and Charlie Fox was one of our coaches. Pat Corrales was one of our coaches. Frank Howard, Hondo, was another coach. And John Stearns, the bad dude, was a bullpen coach. And I get a call from Pat Corrales. Pat said, I think the axe is about ready to fall. I said, come on upstairs. So we go up to Dallas's suite. And this is, you know, and Dallas is down talking to George. So we're in the room. Charlie Fox, who was Dallas's guy, Pat Corrales, who was Dallas's guy, and Hondo, who was kind of he wasn't really Dallas's guy. So Dallas calls up, says to Charlie, we're out, we're fired. To Pat, we're out, we're fired. But Mr. Steinbrenner wants to talk to Frank Howard. And it's a true story. Hondo, all 6'7" of them, I can picture it as if it was yesterday. He gets the phone like this, and I'm guessing what's going on the other side. And Hondo says, yes, Mr. Steinbrenner. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Well, Mr. Steinbrenner, I appreciate that offer, but my mama always told me you leave the dance with the girl who brung you. So I will not stay on this team. In other words, George had offered him the job of staying. Yeah. Everybody else got fired. And Billy Connors was a pitching coach. Billy stayed. But that was Hondo. That's the kind of guy Hondo was. He could have stayed, but he said, no, Dallas Green hired me, so I'm leaving. That tells you about Frank Howard. But that's the way it was. It was a crazy year. I mean, Sparky Lyle's book hit the nail right on the head. It was the Bronx Zoo. Right. And that was certainly a year where the zoo was in full effect.
And let me ask you this, George. Working with Scooter, and I mean, was he as funny off air as he was on the air? Because I mean, he was just a riot, that guy. I mean, the stories about the cannolis and, stuff he did with his wife after the games and stuff, being afraid of the thunder and lightning and stuff. I mean, was he the same off?
He was exactly the same. It was like working with your old Italian uncle. Right. You mentioned Bill White. I'll tell you a quick story about Bill. Bill and I were very close, and when Bill took the job as National League president, originally I was going to come in and work with White and Rizzoto, and then Bill got the job, and he said, "Come on down to New York. We got to have lunch." And so I come down to New York and we have lunch, and we're sitting down. He says, "I want to tell you something. See this finger? This is the most important finger you have, and I want you to remember this." And he tells a story that he and Scooter are doing a game. That's when the games used to start at 8 in spring training down in Fort Lauderdale, when the Yankees used to train in Fort Lauderdale. So they did one game a week on Friday nights. Friday night, it's a cold night, it's windy. They're playing the Montreal Expos, and two weeks in a row. Montreal played in West Palm. So Scooter, it's the 8th inning, going to the 9th inning, and the Yankees are leading 9-4. Scooter gets up and says, "White, you want a coffee?" And Bill says, "Yeah." Scooter gets up and leaves. Now, in top of the 9th inning, the Expos score 5 runs and tie the game at 9. Bottom of the 9th inning, no Scooter. 10th inning, no Scooter. Yeah. Finally, Wallace Johnson ends up hitting a home run in the top of the 11th inning, and Montreal goes on to win the game. Now White is frosted because Scooter took off on him. Yeah. Doesn't hear a thing from Scooter. Next Friday, they're at the ballpark in Fort Lauderdale waiting. It's 6:00, no Scooter. 6:15, no Scooter. 6:30, no Scooter. Finally, about 15 minutes before the ball game starts, Scooter comes in with a cup of coffee for White. He puts it down in front of him. And they didn't even talk the whole night long. So Bill says to me, he says, "So when Scooter says to you, 'Do you want a cup of coffee?' you take this finger and you put it in the belt loop of his pants, and you grab him and you don't let him get up, because when he gets up to leave, he's not coming back."
That's a great story. And the 1990 season, it was another bad year for the Yankees. They finished dead last. Bucky Dent got fired early on, I think in May, and Stump Miro took over. And, again, it was another crazy season because, they traded Dave Winfield for like an agent, Mike Witt, who had plenty of arm trouble. George was going through stuff that we didn't even realize was bad. So, I mean, in 2 years with the Yankees, George, it may have been only 2 years, but my God, you could write a book in those 2 years because it was quite the adventures working with that team.
Right. A couple of things that you mentioned. First of all, I think it was a shame that Bucky took the job to manage that team, because I think he would have been an outstanding major league manager, but he never got another chance. which is too bad. He had no chance with that team. But Dave, if you remember, Winfield hurt his back
in 1989,
and missed part of the season. And Dave and I were pretty close. And the question was he going to come back? Is he going to be able to play again? And I asked him, I said, we're going out to Anaheim, and that's where he was living. I said, would you come in and sit in with us, and tell everybody, what your status is? And he says, I don't know. I'm going to get, I don't know. Finally, he says, okay, I'll do it. So before we go to Anaheim, Arthur Richmond is the PR director.
Yeah.
And I said, Arthur, I just want to let you know that when we go to Anaheim, it's a Friday, Saturday, Sunday series. Winfield is going to come in and talk with us about his status. And Arthur goes, oh, Georgie, no, Georgie, you can't do that. You can't do that. He says, Mr. Steinbrenner will go crazy. I said, well, I said, well, I already asked him, he's going to come in. I said, look, I don't want to get you in trouble. So you don't know anything about this. Don't even say anything. So we go to Anaheim, and in that day, in that era, there was an open press box, so you could hear the intercom and the PA system everywhere. So Winfield comes in, Dave sits down, and he did nothing but throw bouquets at George. And of course, Steinbrenner hated him. If you remember, Al Froman, his agent, they were clashing back and forth, trying to get out of the contract. So I got 30 seconds into the interview, and I could hear on the PA system behind me, Arthur Richmond, you have a phone call. And I knew who was calling. So we do the interview. It's over. Game's over. I go back into the clubhouse after the game, and I said, so Arthur, what's the story? He goes, oh, Georgie. He says, you're not going to believe Steinbrenner's irate, So we play the games over the weekend. We're going back to Yankee Stadium on Monday. So I always go in early. I'm about 12:30, 1 o'clock, and I'm walking into the booth, and I know that Steinbrenner's upset, right? So I stopped by his office, and I said to the secretary, I said, is Mr. Steinbrenner available? And he said, no, he's very busy. He's very busy. So I'm in the booth getting ready, and his secretary comes and says, Mr. Steinbrenner wants to see you. So I go in, and in George's office, he had one of those big baseball glove chairs.
Yeah.
And here's his desk here, and it's over there. And when you sit in it, you're about 3 feet lower than George. So he says, have a seat. So I sit in it, and I'm looking up like this at George Steinbrenner. And he says, he said, well, what did you think of the trip? And I said, we're playing better. We're doing good. So on and so forth. And I said, and Mr. Steinbrenner, I know you weren't happy that I had Dave Winfield come in. Oh, you're darn tootin', I wasn't happy. And he's slamming. So we went back and forth for about 15, 20 minutes. And I said, Mr. Steinbrenner, the only thing the Yankee fans want to know is Dave Winfield going to come back and play? That's all that counts. So we got in, we talked about that, and we went back and forth on it. And I'll tell you, really, I think it solidified our relationship because, we went back and forth. He yelled at me, and I said, well, I'll stand by what we did because I think we did the right thing for Yankee fans. And we became at that point, our relationship became different. And until the day he died, till he got ill, we had a wonderful relationship. But he hated Winfield, and Winnie and I. Every time Winnie and I get together, we laugh about that and about some other things too. But he was the best. But yeah, it was working with Tom, who was my teammate at SC, and working with Scooter. Scooter was just a wonderful person, and Marty Appel, who ran our broadcast, was he was such a supporter of Scooter. And for me to have the opportunity to work with Scooter, and when you work with Scooter and Cora, his wife, Whitey and Joan, Whitey Ford and his wife Joan,
Right.
and Yogi and Carmen. The three couples lived within miles of each other in Jersey, and they were like one family. And everything that one did, the other did. And that period of time, in fact, every year I'd go to Cooperstown. The 30 years I did the ceremonies there, we have a dinner on Friday night, and I always sat at the Friday night dinner with those three couples because it was like sitting on Thanksgiving or Christmas with your family.
Right.
We'd tell stories, and they'd tell stories with each other and laugh, and it was a wonderful experience.
Yeah, and you talk about the Hall of Fame, George, but when he got in the Hall of Fame, that was one of the funniest speeches of all times. I mean, he told like 4 different stories without finishing each one. He's hitting the bugs because the bugs are coming everywhere. I mean, it was the most entertaining Hall of Fame speech I think we ever saw.
Yeah, there's a couple of sides to that. Number one, talking about Steinbrenner, George was irate with the Hall of Fame because, other people got in and he thought Scooter deserved to get in. And one of the things we talked about that day was, Mr. Steinbrenner, you got to stop getting on the Hall of Fame voters. Scooter's going to get in, but it's just going to take time. And the bottom line was Pee Wee got in. And once Pee Wee got in, that assured that Scooter was going to get in. Back in those days, it was a veterans committee of 19 players, former players that were part of it. And the funny part of the whole scenario was Ted Williams was the man who really ran that committee because he was the most demonstrative man on the committee. It was Ted Williams, Stan Musial, Barra Ford, Joe Brown from Pittsburgh, Charlie Gehringer. They were all bona fide Hall of Famers. And bottom line was they worked a deal. And Ted Williams said, I want Bobby Doerr.
Right.
Yogi Berra and Whitey Ford wanted Scooter. The Dodgers, at that point, Roy Campanella was on the team. They wanted Pee Wee Reese. Charlie Gehringer wanted Dick Bartell, who was his shortstop. So they worked a deal, and Ted said, look, we're all going to get our guys. You just have to be patient. So one by one, Pee Wee got in. It was the first unanimous vote ever. And that was because of everything he did for Jackie Robinson, obviously. But once that happened, it was going to happen for Scooter. And all of those guys got in. The only guy that got jobbed in the whole thing was Charlie Gehringer. Charlie passed away. So Dick Bartell never got in. But all the other guys got in. But it was, it was pretty special. It was when Scooter got in the night before, Tom Seaver and I'll never forget it. We're sitting on the veranda at the Otis Saga. We would always sit, and we were having a glass of wine, and we toasted each other. And he looked at me, and I looked at him. I said, you know something? You and I are the only 2 people in America that know what everybody's in for tomorrow. And we toasted and we laughed. And you're right. It was Scooter you never knew what was going to happen, what he was going to say. And the funny part, I'm sitting on the stage and Scooter's up here giving his speech. And what no one heard in the background was all the guys, because it was hot. And you got Ralph Kiner and Bob Feller and Bob Gibson saying, come on, Scooter, shut up, sit down. And then Scooter started, and then they all started to laugh. You're right. I think the 2 best speeches that I ever heard up there were Scooter's and Bob Euchre's.
And I knew you were going to say Bob Euchre's. Euchre's was priceless, It
was priceless.
Yeah. Rich, you brought Valley football up, and I'll never forget 1990 Derby football won the state title. So they had a big banquet for them in February 1991, and you were the, Matt, you were the guest speaker, and you made a joke about Scooter. And then I'll never forget, it might have been 2 or 3 days later, I see this little thing on the top of the New Haven Register. You'll see me in St. Louis next year, and it broke my heart. But I'm trying to go back to that time, and I think at the time PIX had and the Yankees weren't sure if they were going to come back with WPIX. So was that mainly the reason you took the job in St. Louis? Is you just wanted to make sure you?
We had we were doing 85 games, Yankee games on PIX. That was before MSG.
Right.
Then MSG came in, and we went down to 35 games.
Yeah.
So Scooter got paid, what he got paid. But I got paid, most of us got paid on a per game basis. So I went from 85 down to 35 games, and it just, it just didn't make sense. But it was difficult because we had a wonderful relationship, and Tom and Scooter and I, and Tom was doing CBS also. But we had just it was just special. It was like being with family every single time you entered that booth. And John Moore was our producer and our director, and the people we had were wonderful. Dulio Costabile was our cameraman in the booth, and it was a pretty special time, certainly. And while you never know, I'm a great believer that the Lord closes doors and opens windows, and for me it was a great opportunity. And I love my time in St. Louis. The only difficulty there was they wanted me to move there and do the hockey and the basket and the baseball. And Joanne and I had decided from early on that Connecticut's our home, and if I can do what I can do and stay home, fine. If not, I mean, I'll do landscaping, I'll do high school sports or whatever. We wanted our kids to grow up with a family, with a community. So I've been pretty lucky. I've been blessed to have worked with some great people and also be able to keep our home here.
Right. And after the run with St. Louis ended, you would go on to Cincinnati, and you would do that 17 years full time. And I think it was you and a guy named Chris Welch, was it?
Yeah.
And you guys were the longest running duo for Cincinnati baseball. And then I think you would do it on a part-time basis for another 10 years. So 27 years doing Cincinnati Red games. Just, think about this, George. You did 3 baseball teams in your life, really, when you get right down to it. And these are 3 great baseball towns. These people love baseball. And I mean, you got to, and all 3 have a lot of history to them, a lot of, special things about them. The Big Red Machine. St. Louis has the second most titles. Of course, the Yankees, the most titles. So, I mean, you got to work with maybe 3 of the great baseball towns ever in, your 30 plus years doing baseball.
You're right. I've been pretty blessed and fortunate, and I thank the Lord that I've had the opportunity to do that. And along the way, work with some great people. Chris and I was like working with my brother Carlo. Carl and I did radio together, and we working with Chris was like working with my brother, and it was the same thing. With the Cardinals, I work with Al Roboski. In fact, I just talked to him the other day, and still very close. And of course, with Tom and Scooter, it was something special there too. But when all is said and done, what you remember most are the people that you work with.
Right.
Not so much where you were, or what your job title was, but the people that you work with. And I've been pretty fortunate, very, very happy. And another guy who we both know, Rich Marazzi. Rich and Carlo and I did radio shows together for years. And Rich and I still, in fact, I talk about going back to the 70s and the 80s. When he was a basketball coach at O'Brien Tech, that's when we first got to know each other. I cover his games, I spoke at his banquet, and then when I started at ESPN, I started the baseball show, Inside Baseball, and I brought Rich in where we would just talk baseball, and he would, back then we didn't have access to video. So I said, Rich, you got a lot of baseball cards? He says, do I have baseball cards? So I'd take shots of baseball cards, and we'd zoom in on them and go out on them because we couldn't use video.
Right.
And we would have trivia questions, and Hey, that's hard to believe. That's 50 years ago, and we've been friends for 50 years.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, he's offered a lot to the game of baseball. He's done a lot for
Oh, yeah.
the Yankees. I mean, he's done so many great things. I mean, he is tremendous with the rules of the game. He could tell you every rule that there's rules I never knew were possible, and he's explained them. So, I mean, he's been tremendous to the game of baseball, and he's a great guy. I mean, you know, when I look at you and Rich, I look at guys who went on to do great things, but you never forgot where you came from. And that's always important because sometimes people do. They forget that they started in a little small area. You guys never forgot that. And you've always kept Connecticut, you know, right next to your buckle, you know?
We've been blessed by that. I don't think there's any doubt about that. We've been fortunate. Every time we get together, we talk about, you know, the people that we've crossed paths with, the Bart Giamattis, and, you know, the people like, Lou DiFilippo and Joe Bonanto, and, you know, from Ansoni and Derby, and Billy McAllister, and Coach Heffernan, all those people that, that over the years that cared about kids. And I think we learned from that. We learned from, you know, the Frank Crisafis in East Haven, you know, the Joe Brunos of Hamden, you know, the people, Lou Astorino, the hockey coach at Hamden too. They cared about the kids that they had. So did all of these guys. And I think that's what we learned from. They gave back to their communities by coaching. And I think all of us believe that we give back to our profession and we give back to our community by doing the same thing. I don't think any of us should forget that.
Right. Rich, let me ask you this, because you did Reds games forever. So this is something that I'm sure you heard a lot about over the years. Do you think Pete Rose will ever get in the Hall of Fame, or do you think it won't happen until he passes away?
I think someday he will, because I think it'll be sad, you know, if it doesn't happen until after he passes away. But I think the way he played the game on the field, for what he did on the field, he deserves to be in the Hall of Fame.
Right.
For what he did off the field, and, you know, there's no doubt about it. I mean, he admits he screwed up. And also, I mean, the rule was very clear. You bet on baseball, you're banned from the game.
Right.
The sad part of all of that was Pete thought he was bulletproof and thought he could get away with it. Great. Bart Giamatti and I were very close. And I'll never forget having breakfast with him one day in downtown New Haven before he took the commissioner's job, when he was National League president.
Yeah.
And I asked him, I said, what are you going to do about Pete Rose? He says, Pete Rose is one of my favorite players. I'm going to offer him a 1-year suspension if he'll admit to me that he bet on baseball, and it'll be over. Pete wouldn't do that. It would have been over in a year, and, you know, we wouldn't even be talking about this. I think he should be elected and inducted, and I think his whole story should be told.
Right.
What he did, the fact he was banned from the game. But, I mean, come on. I mean, people that have used drugs, people that have done things that are in many cases far worse than what he did, are honored by the game. Some of them are in Cooperstown. And I think there'll be more people. I think we're seeing a change. I think this analytics era, you know, looks at everything a little bit differently. So I think people that, you know, when some of the old timers are gone, the voting process will change. And I do believe eventually he'll get in. It might not be till he's passed away, which would be sad.
Right.
I mean, I've been there in Cooperstown, you know, when Leo DeRocha got in after he died. Ronnie Santo, who should have been in years before, he wasn't able to celebrate that. Guys like that, it's sad when they don't do that. But the way he played the game, for what he did on the field, he belongs in the Hall of Fame. But the whole story should be told.
Right. And now let me ask you this. Do you think Clemens and Bonds get in eventually someday?
Yeah, I think they will. I don't think they'll get in with the writers, but I think, again, the analytics view of what they did in their careers at some point in time, some of the young writers and people who vote will take a different look than the old timers. And I think as the old timers pass on, I think they'll look at it differently. So, I mean, it's sad because both of them were Hall of Famers before they ever started taking this stuff. And they were both special athletes. and I got to know both of them quite well. And it's sad for the game that they took the route that they took, because they were Hall of Famers before they ever did that.
Right.
But I do think eventually they will, and I don't think it'll be by the vote. I think it'll be after the fact.
Right. George, you've been around sports, professional sports, like we said, probably since 1979, even going far back as the late 60s with the Red Sox. It's probably hard for you to put one thing that stands out above all the rest. But if you had to pick one thing in your career that you're most proud about, what would you say it is?
Oh, I don't know. I'd say probably I'll go back to the beginning. I'll go back to, the people we talked about, the great high school coaches, college coaches, the Carm Kozes, all the men that we've been mentioning before. And what I learned from them, my mom and dad were both educators. To watch them, I remember when I went to USC, before I went, I remember going to Southern, and Frank Vieira took me out there and ran me through the hit ground balls to me, watch me swing, and said, look, these are the things you're going to have to do to get better if you want to play at USC.
Right.
People like that, the Frank Vieiras of the world, the Ray Legenzas of the world. It was a great baseball coach in Naugatuck, and all the men we've been talking about. So I think for me, the greatest joy starts here, starts in Connecticut, starts with high school sports. Not only the coaches who were so much a part of it, who were leaders of their community, who cared about the kids, but then the kids, to watch them grow up. The guys like, Scott Burrell,
Right.
and Diana, and all those guys, Johnny Pags, that became great leaders of their community. Those are the guys who you think back on, and you watch them carry the football or throw the baseball, or or shoot a basketball or whatever. And then watch what they do in real life. I think that's the special part of what we all see.
Right.
And I love doing professional sports. I love my time at ESPN. I love baseball, but I think that the greatest joy I've had starts right here. Starts in high school sports, and continues, I think, because we all continue to have a taste of that. Not only the players that we saw, but their kids and their grandkids, to watch them come along.
Right.
Along the road too.
Right. Well, George, this was a lot of fun for me. Like I said, I've been a fan of yours for well over 30 years. When the Yankees were bad, I had you, Rizzoto, and Seaver to entertain me, and that got me through those 2 seasons. And I can't thank you enough, number one, for what you did for me and everybody else as a fan, but also for coming on today. I really do appreciate it. To me, you're one of the legendary people in Connecticut, and I do congratulate you on a great career.
Oh, thanks. I was the lucky one, and lucky to be with all those people and be a part of that. I think we were all we were all blessed in so many ways, and I think the one thing that none of us should forget is how we are blessed, whether that's personally or professionally, spiritually. Never forget that. And I think if we all do that, we'll all stay grounded, I think. Nate, it's been great being with you, and best of luck to you. Hope to see you along the road.
Well, thank you, George. I appreciate that. Folks, I said it before. I've been a fan of George Grande for over 30 years. It started in 1987 when I really got involved watching SportsCenter, watching ESPN. He did that Baseball Weekly show, which was fun. And then when he came to the Yankees in 1989, I didn't think anybody could replace Bill White with Phil Rizzuto, but him and Tom Seaver came in. The group didn't miss a beat. And like I said, it was a down year for the Yankees, those 2 years, 89 and 90. But those 3 gave us so much joy and entertained us each and every night. Throughout his life, George Grande has done so many wonderful things. But I think the thing that stands out the most to me is that George Grande Connecticut is still number one in his heart. High school football, high school sports is still number one in his heart. He has never forgotten where he's come from. He's gone on to do great things. I mean, he worked with Phil Rizzuto. He was the master of ceremonies at the National Baseball Hall of Fame for over 30 years. And yet he still remembers the small state that we live in called Connecticut, and he's never forgotten that, not one time. I think that's what stands out to me the most about George Grande. For Hometown Heroes, I'm Mike Kenichi saying good night, everyone. All right.